Very good. Hello, everybody. Greetings from Phoenix, Arizona in the United States. Firstly, I just want to thank the spam call, but thank you for the invitation to participate today. I have had great respect for the Kanban organization all the years, and I'm very honored that you find value in my work. So the focus of today is for me to share with you three tranches of information. The first one is to review a little bit the work that's encapsulated in my book. The second is to walk you through a live case study so that you can learn some active lessons from the work we're doing. And thirdly, I want to talk about the next developments, what we've learned over time and how I want to share those with you to enable you to also be more impactful in what you do. So without further ado, let me switch to my presentation deck, and we will walk through the messages.
Porque eu print aqui mesmo, cara?
É só apertar frente. Só apertar força.
Very good. And everybody can see my screen, yes?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. So the title of my talk is Motivating High Performance Teams. I know everybody on this call and in this conversation have faced the uphill battles sometimes to get an organization to drive change, to implement large-scale improvements, and really to see things through to the end. And in my career for the last 40 years that I've been in management consulting in many places around the world, my personal just cause has always been to bring meaning to people's lives through impactful leadership, because at the end of the day, everything that happens in the world is entirely dependent on the quality of the leaders that get us where we want to go. Our company, Akzeon in Arizona, we've pretty much a training and publishing company, and we have a focus on tribal leadership through our engagement throughout the world. And just to cement my credentials with you, is that in my career with my organization, we've been involved north of 200 different companies around the world, anything from milking cows to making tires to running shared services in the largest corporation in the world. It's literally been everywhere. There's very few countries we've not been in. But the really important point for me was in all of this journey over 40 years, there was a handful of companies that I interacted with that were dramatically more successful than others, but not by a little bit, by a lot. And it fascinated me that I could not find the reason for their success in everything that I've learned in my years in business school, through my graduate school, through my PhD, what it is that drove them. And that set me off on the journey to see if I can identify what this particular capability is that drives them to be so successful. And the interesting that I learned is that their success was not entirely dependent on individual leaders. Collectively, the organizations just did profoundly better than others that I've worked with. And that got me to spend the better part of 15 years to try and identify what this underlying organizational, socio-organizational construct is that drives this outstanding performance. And it was very intangible, but it was extremely important for me to find out what this was. So it had to do with the way that people were motivated to participate in the organization, were motivated to contribute their best, motivated to make sure that everybody was on board and was working together to make sure we got to our objectives. And it led me to a new definition of motivation. And it said that motivation is a continuous interaction between individuals and the groups or tribes which define his or her identity or self-worth. So this was a big insight because all my research into motivation pointed to the fact that motivation is always associated with the individual. But there's very little work in the academic realm of motivation for entire groups or entire organizations. And I had to go back and find the most fundamental organization format that actually dictates the way that we interact as humans. And that is simply the concept of tribes. It's been around since the dawn of man, and it's something that still governs and dominates the way that we interact with one another. And that insight got me to define a new set of variables that influence the way that we act or or participate in groups. The first one is tribal security. Is our company secure? Do we have a good market? Are we making money? Can we afford to pay everybody? That's tribal security. The second one is tribal value. This one says that even after our company is secure, we need to feel a sense of achievement, feel a sense of doing something great that everybody can point to and say, wow, that's awesome. Our company has done something really spectacular. On the other hand is individual security. It's a relationship between the individual and the group that they participate in or work with. If they feel secure in the group, they'll participate. If they feel that they bring personal value, that also drives us to feel more of a sense of cohesion, a sense of belonging, a sense of contributing. So we have these four variables: tribal value, tribal security, individual value, individual security. And they dynamically interact with one another all the time. So these value states and security states are different from one another. And just to quickly go through this slide, if I do this on a continuum, that says on the top left-hand corner, this dynamic interplay between the individual and the group says that if my tribal value is high, our company is successful, we're recognized, we're admired, the individuals feel that they make a real contribution, they feel respected and valued, then I get peak performance out of the organization. However, if the tribal security becomes threatened, competitors are taking our market share, our profitability is going down, but the individuals still feel in their own right that they are valued, then the organization will work to restore the balance, restore us back to a position of admiration and success. However, if the tribal value is still strong, but the individual security is low, where people don't feel that they belong to the organization, even though this organization is successful, they will work really hard to integrate themselves back into the organization, be accepted, be part of the team, and have a significant contribution to success. The worst quadrant is the bottom right one that says, if the tribal security is low, the company is greatly under threat, it may go bankrupt, it may go out of existence. The individuals feel insecure, they haven't been paid, or there's layoffs happening, then the organization will splinter. And then those tribes will reform. The people will leave, they'll join other companies, and they'll see how they can contribute to those.
Just a moment. People are saying there is some noise from your side. I'm not sure if you have something touching or microphone or something.
Yeah, so if you will give me, it's unfortunately nothing I can do about it. It's construction work that's going on outside. If it is majorly intrusive, then I can try to stop it, but I think we should just continue.
No, okay. No, you can go ahead. Thank you.
I apologize for that. Very good. Okay. So this interplay between corporate success and corporate failure and value and security, it's a very predictable continuum. So if the company has very high tribal value, very high individual value, then everybody is motivated, they're committed, they're excited to be there. And then slowly, as tribal value decreases and individual value is still strong, people work to resurrect the organization or restore its former glory. But slowly but surely, this continuum deteriorates over time, and it takes a very specific leadership interaction to make sure that we constantly, despite changes in the environment, despite the fact that other competitors come into market, we lose key skills, our patents expire, things that happen to the organization, to constantly drive the organization to stay in the top left-hand corner, where the corporate success is very much driven by strong tribal value and strong individual value. So then the question is, how do I make this happen? And this drove us to define this concept of tribes. And we set out to define what is it that makes for a successful tribe. Because you've all been to a soccer match where the day that the championship plays out, and you have the two final soccer teams on the field, and the crowd goes crazy. And in that environment, it's a wonderful example of just how a situational tribe develops. Everybody's engaged, everybody's motivated, everybody's excited, everybody's engaged. It's that kind of interpersonal dynamic that we set out to see if we can define in a way that it can be managed and be applied to other environments. And we learned that in my book, Great Boss, Dead Boss, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, we defined the attributes of a highly motivated and successful tribe. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because I want to get to some of the more applicable information. The first one is a strong tribe has a just cause. It's something that's bigger than the mission statement. It's bigger than the objective of the organization. It's the thing that motivates people from the heart. And the good example here is Doctors Without Frontiers, where doctors volunteer to go work in different parts of the world. It's a very motivating just cause where they bring their skills to help humanity. The second tribal attribute is a common enemy. It's something that we all feel we can align to try and defeat, something that we can, that's a threat to our tribe, a threat to our value and our existence, and we have to defeat the common enemy. Third one is external measures of success. These are the things that we can use, indicators that tell us whether we're doing well or not. So sometimes we look at things like stock price, we look at earnings per share. Those are the kinds of things that companies use as external measures of success. But any tribe needs an external measure of success to validate its existence and its success. Then there's something that we call the rite of passage that says there has to be a reason for me to know that I've been accepted by the tribe. So for example, in the military, every soldier goes through boot camp. The first 3 months of their participation in the military, they go through a standard boot camp exercise. And that's pretty much a rite of passage. If you come through boot camp and you're into the military as a professional soldier, that you've proven yourself. You've done the grueling physicals, you've done the grueling exercises, the hikes, the marches, the hard work. You're in. You're part of the tribe now. Then there are significant events. Tribes are defined by the significant events that they celebrate, things that are major, like a new customer or a new market that we've got. Strong tribes celebrate those things. They make use of them to validate the existence and success of the tribe. There's also a justice mechanism, that there are certain behaviors in the tribe that are acceptable and not acceptable. And there's a way that is deviations from those norms are dealt with and visibly corrected or modified for the tribe to see. There are membership criteria that says, how do I get into this tribe? One of the things when you go to your medical doctor, you would like to see his diploma on the wall to know that he's a qualified medical doctor. He's part of the tribe of medical doctors that's going to help you to maintain your health. There are defined symbols. Many of you have seen on your laptop computers the famous sticker from Intel that said Intel inside, which is a defined symbol that says, in my computer laptop, doesn't matter what brand it is, it has an Intel processor inside. There's a unique language. Tribes develop their own way of talking to one another. Many times when you talk to specialists, they have their own language. They talk in a way that's pretty much foreign to us. The medical profession, here again, is a great example of a language that many of us would hardly understand. There are untouchables. Good tribes know that we're good because these other people are bad, or they're not as good as we are. And sometimes it gives us a sense of feeling and self-worth when we can make that comparison to others. We have a revered figurehead. Strong tribes have somebody that they can look up to, that embodies the values of the tribe, that people take their cues from on behavior and direction of action. There's care for skills and tools. Strong tribes know what makes them successful. They will make sure that everybody that participates knows what's important for us to succeed, what tools, what technology, what capability. There's a dedicated leader, somebody that really has the success of the tribe at heart, that goes out and fights the wars for us to make sure our tribe succeeds. We have roles and chains of command, very clear structures. One thing that always fascinates me is every year, there is a long and protracted union negotiation between the United Auto Workers Union in the United States and the management of all the automotive companies. And every year, the union has its own structure, it has its own union boss, it has its own organization, and those organizations, essentially two tribes that are pitted against one another in their conflict for the scarce resources of the organization. Care for skills and tools. I'm sorry, that's a duplicate. There's a superordinate identity. Many times in organizations that are dysfunctional, I will always find that there are many sub-tribes. There are many groups inside the organization that are in competition with one another. Many times it's for promotion, it's competition for resources, it's competition for space to grow our business, to have a bigger budget. And in our work, what we do is to try and bring all those sub-tribes together and give them a superordinate identity that we can align everybody's motivation to. We protect our source of power. Many times we look at technology, maybe what gives us the right to exist, and tries to make sure that they protect that source of power as best they can. There's co-responsibility, where it's not just the individual that's responsible for making sure that the organization succeeds, but that we are held co-responsible for the success. There are icons that embody our value, things that symbols that signify our value, things like the Nike swoosh, Adidas, all of those brands. Those are classic icons of the value of the organizations. Tribes require loyalty. There's an expectation that the members of the tribe will act to the tribe's best interest and will make sure that they bring value to the tribe as they engage in its activities. Non-traditional communication, they frequently use different channels. It's the old water cooler conversation model. It's where tribes talk amongst themselves frequently in a completely different way from what the organization uses to communicate, simply because we're trying to align work horizontally across the organization. Tribe as a walled city, a place where we keep our valuables, a place that people think they know this is important for us. And I will talk in my example to you about the classic walled city exercise. Leaders have mentors. One of the things that we found is very important, that the leaders that are very successful in building good tribes never assume that they are the best, because as soon as they rely on their own capability, then the tribe tends to distrust them. And if they know that the leaders themselves are on a journey of improvement, there's a lot more trust in what they do for the tribe to succeed. And then objects of value, the things that make our tribe successful, that tell us we're successful, are the things that we venerate. And many times these are in patents, they are in new products that we bring to market that nobody else can make. Those are the kinds of things that we have. And then the last one, which is not in the book, which is a new one that we brought along lately, is the issue of shared norms, where we have a certain set of criteria that we work to that will help us define our success. So Rodrigo, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to step outside for 1 minute to see if I can reduce the amount of noise. So if you'll all take a quick break. Okay. Let me see if I can do something about this. So let me put my microphone on mute.
Okay. Pessoal, isso acontece. Querer, senão o Ray lá vai subir nas tamancas lá e vai
dar um cheiro lá no Arizona. Todo mundo trancado em casa. Essas polêmicas.
Galera, não esqueça de fazer as perguntas aí. Coraci já colocou uma pergunta aqui que eu quero ver, hein? Boa, Coraci. Tô com medo do Ray abrir a câmera dele e ele tá com o olho roxo. Vamos aguardar aí, pessoal. O Ray foi resolver o problema do barulho. Acho que ele está de volta aí.
Very unhappy construction people.
Okay. Thank you, Ray.
No problem. My apologies for the interruption.
No problem.
Very good.
Okay.
So let me move along.
Okay.
So to underpin my interest in the tribal model, I went and had a look at the progression of improvement paradigms over time. And many of you that are on the call, I'm sure, have lived this through the years. Now, this kind of reflects the length of my involvement. But I had to look at all of the major improvement paradigms that we've seen from 1950 to 2020, over 70 years. And you've all been familiar with them. We get these huge sweeps of new business improvement models, whether it's Lean or it's Six Sigma or it's business process engineering, and it flows through the whole business world. And then they tend to die out, and then we get a new one that comes in. And I went and had a look at all of these, and starting from 1945, when Edward Deming, from the work of Walter Shewhart, started the whole quality movement in 1940s after the war. This turned into total quality management around 1961. That was a huge new sweep. I'm sure many of you have been in green areas and quality circles. All the good things companies try to do to bring some more predictability and reliability to the work that they do. Then there was competitive strategy, Michael Porter in the 1980s, which had a huge impact on how organizations framed their competitive advantage. There was theory of constraints that Eli Goldratt brought in 1984 through his book, The Goal. There was business process reengineering, Michael Hammer's famous book in 1987, which was a whole new sweep of reengineering the organization, flatten it out, lower the levels of management, take a lot of people out of the organizations, one of the big cost reduction drives. Then came Michael Harry's work in Six Sigma with General Electric in 1990, which was another huge wave of change that flowed through the business world. Concurrent with that was Fifth Discipline from Peter Senge, which also had a major impact on how people thought about the structure of business. Then the whole Lean Toyota production system movement in the early 90s from Jim Womack's work, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Then came Good to Great from Jim Collins in the early 2000s, which focused very heavily on what makes organizations exceptionally good. And his focus was very much on having the right people on the bus, essentially. Then came the 5 dysfunctions of the team, Patrick Lencioni's work. Then a little bit of my contribution. And then the whole Agile movement, which you're all familiar with and clearly greatly involved with what happens there. So we see these sweeps of these big flows of improvement that go through the business world. But there's a very interesting dynamic, which I want to point out to you. Quality was about process. Total quality management was about process. Competitive strategy was how do I build a strategy, essentially a process of strategy. Eli Goldratt was the first one to start talking about systemic approaches to how organizations function. Business process reengineering, essentially a process focus. Six Sigma, this is how we run the process of continuous improvement. Fifth Discipline, Peter Senge's book, was the second one that spoke a little bit about systems. Then Lean, totally operated production system, was around process. Then there's Good to Great, and here there's a subtle shift, because now the focus went from process and systems to teams. The 5 dysfunctions of a team focused on, again, on teams. My work focused on teams. And the Agile work, although there's a process, some part of process in it, is essentially a focus on making effective teams to deliver results. So you can see over time, from my interpretation, there's a subtle movement from systems and process to teams as the dominant driver for improvement. And that's really important. And that resonates with the work we've been doing, is that there is a fundamental shift from tasks to relationships as the driver for success in organizations. So that brings us to the point that what's next? And what's next is driven by this combination of systems, teams, and data. And this is driven to a large extent by the massive increase in the amount of data that's available to organizations and to individuals. You know, that iPhone you have in your hand, you have more computing power and more access to information than anybody has ever had in the existence of the world. And that's influencing the way that organizations function. And one of the areas that we have a lot of traction is with Silicon Valley, because in Silicon Valley, the dynamic of the organizations are significantly different from the traditional operations, manufacturing environments. Everybody is essentially a free agent. They can do what they want. They can leave tomorrow from Google and they can go work for Salesforce or anybody else. There's lots of fluidity, which means that the way that you manage people is dramatically different to make sure they're motivated, committed, engaged, and you can continue to make them feel they're part of something that's significant. So that brings us to another point that says, well, how do I manage this? Because now the requirements for management to be able to keep people motivated and engaged is profoundly different. And here I want to share with you a case study to illustrate how I can use the tribal construct to drive this level of motivation, commitment, and engagement that we all need to make sure that our initiatives are successful at the end of the day. This case study, I cannot share with you the name of the company. I can tell you it's a global corporation. It's headquartered in the United States. There's close to 100,000 employees. And they called me up and said, Ray, there's a problem here. We want you to help us figure out what's going on. And this organization, they put an enormous amount of value on new product development. They're in the consumer space, and in the consumer space, product life is relatively short, and they have to substitute new products fairly quickly in their market segments. And the way that they addressed this was that they created something called the next generation group, which was they went throughout the organization. They asked all of the executives for all the functions in the organization to pick the very brightest people they have, and then loan them on a period for about 2 to 3 years to the next generation organization. And the assumption was that if we put all these people together and we ask them, we put the best brains together, that they're going to come up with the new products that the company needs to secure its growth and profitability. But it didn't happen. The group did not produce the expected results. So the first question I had is, well, what's the level of motivation? What's the sense of tribal security, tribal value, individual security, individual value? And what I want to share with you is the measurement tool we've developed over time that we can actively measure the motivation of the group. And although the slide is very cluttered, I'm not going to go through the details. I will share with you just what it tells. So you will recognize on the horizontal axis of this graph all of the tribal attributes that we've spoken about. Significant events, dedicated leader, just cause, in order of the magnitude that we sense these tribal attributes to be at play within the organization. So this scale goes from -2 to +2. So you can see that significant events and dedicated leaders has the very highest impact on motivation of people. On the right-hand side, this little box here is really important because this shows me the 4 dimensions of motivation: individual security, individual value, tribal security, and tribal value. Now, very first thing that jumps out here is this low tribal security that says people in the organization, which is supposed to be the best of the best, don't feel secure. And that was a huge insight for management to say that we've given these people all the resources they need. We've given them the runway to do whatever they want, and still they feel insecure. So we went and we measured very specifically the group that is responsible within this organization, because there's like admin and there's some support functions, IT, but the people that are really supposed to be the creators of the new products were, you can see in the blue bars, had profoundly different perceptions of the motivators that I explained to you than what the organization as a whole had. And in particular, on the blue box, you can see that their individual value was much lower than the group as a whole. Their individual security was about on par. Their tribal value was low, but their tribal security was a little higher than the rest of the organization. So this got us to think about, well, what is it that we should manipulate here to see if we can drive the level of tribal security, the level of tribal value, individual security higher. And what the graph tells us is, if you look on the right-hand side, you can see there are variables here in the motivation of the tribe that we can actively manipulate. Rite of passage, untouchables, external measure of success, common enemy. You can see those are relatively low. So we sat down with management and we put together a plan to bring those variables up, and in that way to see if we can drive up the motivation of the tribe itself. And here is the outcome of this exercise. And I must share with you here that we measure and remeasure over time to see if we have a result. So here are the things we focused on: strong tribe, rite of passage, understands the untouchables, chain of command, and then common enemy at the bottom was a really, really important one. So after we implemented our changes, you can see the change in the blue bars, and you can see on the right-hand side the significant increase in tribal value, tribal security, individual value, and tribal value. So the point I want to make here is that the management of motivation of an organization as a whole is as much a management function as it is anything else. It is as important as finance, it's as important as marketing, it's as important as operations. So for my message to the group is, this is a really important variable that's going to impact your success in driving significant change in organizations, but it's actively manageable. You can actually manage it on a day-to-day basis. And here is, for this company, you can see in the question of a year, because these are 6-month measurements, baseline, intermediate, and the end of the year, we drove the motivation index, which we calculate from the variables. And we can show that the organization is making deliberate and protected improvement. But the interesting point I wanted to share with you here, when we asked the question of common enemy, the answer was very interesting because they really had no common enemy. They had all the resources, they could do whatever they like, they could tap into anything in the organization, but still this organization was not motivated. And the common enemy turned out to be fear. And the psychology behind this was fascinating. Because you can imagine, if I'm the person that's now selected to be part of this group, I'm the best in the company. I walk in here, what's the last thing I want to do is to prove them wrong, is to prove them that I'm not the best. And how do I make sure that I prove I'm not the best? Is don't work on anything with high risk. Because if I work on a high risk thing and it fails, by definition, I'm going to prove that I'm not the best in the company. So what happened is there was a psychological dynamic in this team that was rather work on the low risk stuff than work on the high risk stuff, because in the high risk stuff is where the true breakthroughs are going to be, but nobody wanted to be there. So when we identified that the common enemy for this group was internal fear of failure, we could build a process and a dynamic with the leadership to externalize it, make everybody aware of it, generate new external measures of success around how we overcome the fear of failure for this group. It had a profound impact on their change and their mindset. And that's an example that I wanted to share with you about how you will find things that you did not anticipate, which in actual fact drives the decline or very low levels of commitment and motivation in the organization to succeed. And then because we do this for many companies, we could also measure against our global database, where we measure many, many companies and we can compare. And you can see that this group was dramatically more motivated at the end of our intervention compared to all the other companies around the world. And I can share with you many, many case studies. There's a global measurement database. The key of the quality here of leadership in terms of managing the tribe, not in managing the mechanics of the business, but managing the socio-organizational interaction of people in the company. You'll be interested to know that over the years of doing this, we found out that there are essentially 6 archetypes of tribes. First one is creative tribes, and those are you familiar with in the advertising space. There are data tribes, people that are working in all of the data fields. There are operational tribes that work in the coordination of hard resources. There are professional tribes, which is things like accounting and medical. There are service tribes, people that are focused on volunteer work, banking, customer service. And then there are governance tribes, organizations that focus on manipulating and managing the social environment in which we operate as a society. And for each of these, we found that the tribal variables are different. The ones that drive high motivation is different across these different archetypes. So let me then conclude this segment in saying that the really important message I want to communicate to the group is that organizational motivation can be managed like any other management function. It's not a lucky outcome. And if you have highly motivated tribes, they deliver outstanding results. they will do far more than what the organization expects of them. And then for this group in particular, when I was preparing this, I thought to myself, what is it that I want you to take away? First one, if you manage the motivation of the tribe, it's a rocket fuel for success. If you're trying to drive major change in the organization that requires the collaboration, the participation, the commitment from lots of different functions, which is many times the case when we do this, explicitly manage the motivation of that group, that tribe that you're trying to put together. Have an explicit motivational management plan. Treat it as you would everything else. The same way you treat your agile deployments, the same way you treat Kanban. Focus on the motivational variables that will help you succeed. Embed it in the organization. Make sure that it's part of the way the organization operates. Like I showed you with our measurements over time, you can actively drive the level of value, the level of security, the level of engagement, the level of participation, and then remeasure over time. The more you look at it, the more you measure it, the more it becomes part of the way that the organization functions overall. So that's my first two segments of what I wanted to talk through. I still have 5 minutes. I want to quickly talk to you about where next. We've asked ourselves a question: why is Kanban necessary at all? Why did Taiichi Ohno originally invent Kanban? And the reason is that even if I look through David Anderson's fantastic book on Kanban, the origins came from the inability to manage the flow of work and inventory through a set of finite resources. And then we ask ourselves the question, well, what drove that environment to exist in the first instance? And our work has now moved from just looking at the tribes to looking at what drives the conflict between tribes. And we've learned something very, very interesting, which I want to share with you. And I've learned that the most fundamental drivers, things that we assume to be just the way the world works, is many times the causes for us being unable to succeed. So I'm going to share with you a very quick example. If I asked you, write me the process flow for playing the violin. Here is the violinist, he's stroking the strings. Then the process flow diagram is something you're all familiar with. I have some swim lanes, I have some operations, decisions, and I go from beginning to end. And that's not difficult to do. So I can play the violin, and it's going to look something like this: strike the bow, play the notes until I'm at the end of the music. That's easy to do. But if I were to ask you to write the process for this, for the entire orchestra, you can't do it. Because there's so many variables in here, there are so many resources you have to synchronize that you cannot write the process flow. And if you can't write the process flow, it's very, very difficult to manage Kanban. So that got us to the realization that the fundamental driver for the variability and the dependency that causes the conflict between the overload of work and the availability of resources that we try to manage through things like buffer management, Kanban, whatever it is, comes from a different paradigm. And it comes from the most embedded paradigm in organizations that's based on function and process efficiency. That says that somewhere the organization has a process. When I talk to the executives of Walmart, I say to them, you have a very simple process. You buy stuff, you put it on the shelf, you sell it, you get money for it. But this process is intersected by functions, and you're all familiar with them: accounting, sales, distribution, operations, whatever it may be. And there are constant conflicts between the function and process. And the organization yo-yos. It goes from function to process, process to function all the time. So we have functional goals, functional KPIs, functional success criteria, but we also have process criteria. And many times the organization fluctuates between the two. If you're employed by a company, you normally get 3 pieces of information. What's your job title? Here are the company policies, and here's your boss. And then you spend the rest of your time figuring out how to keep your boss happy. And many times keeping your boss happy is at the expense of process. And then the process gets desynchronized. And as soon as it's desynchronized, I get conflicts between the different tribes: the accounting tribe, the operations tribe, the sales tribe. And then you have tribal warfare within the organization. That led us to this fundamental assumption saying, if this is the case, there must be a different model. And we've come up with a new way of looking at the organization. I just want to make a couple of points here. The one is, that the functions strive to meet their local goals and measures. And many times the personal promotion, personal salary increases are based on how well I perform my function. And they're mutually exclusive from conflict. And we've measured through activity sampling studies that it takes about 40% of the productive capacity of the organization away that goes into try to synchronize work. So there's a new model that we propose, and I'm going to skip through this slide, is what we call business system effectiveness. And this is what we found in Silicon Valley, in those areas where it's working. So instead of having a function and process efficiency model, we're now focusing on business system effectiveness, where we break the organization up and define it as a set of interrelated and integrated business activity systems. And that drives us to get much higher synchronization, going from process efficiency to system effectiveness, gets us to move from function process to systems and teams. And this is where the tribal model plays well. Because if I look at my organization as a set of systems, then I can integrate the work much better. And then I get to maximize the impact of work. This is what our system model looks like. We've done a lot of research to try and find a description of a system, but we couldn't find a simple model. So this one here is the way that we go about it. I have inputs, a transformation, which has processes in it, and I have outputs, but that's constantly modulated by some governance function that's referencing a goal for the system. And we've taken this approach, and we've now, to try and get to the root of why we have desynchronization of work, is to reframe the organization as a set of interrelated systems. And that way, we can get better synchronization, we get better information flow, because information flows on these yellow arrows in the diagram. And for me to be able to succeed at that, I have to understand how these systems interconnect with one another. And that's where our focus is at the moment. We see significant gain when we reframe the way the organization thinks about how, at a large scale, it interrelates all of the functions in the organization as a set of systems. In one of the cases that I don't have time to share with you, in Mexico, in a large energy company, we took the entire functional structure out of the organization. No more levels of promotion, no managers, no directors, no vice presidents, nothing, only systems. And every major system has a system owner, and every system is driven by a team. And the team gets rewarded collectively for the success of the system. So then we could combine the tribal model with a new way of configuring the way that the organization executes its work, and has had dramatically successful outcomes for us. So I've come to the end of my allotted time. I apologize again for the noise. So let me stop my share, and then Rodrigo, I think if there is time for questions, this is the time to ask. Okay, so let me look at, so you're still on mute, Rodrigo.
Oh, here we go. Okay, thank you, Ray, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. We have a bunch of questions here, but first I'd like to make my first personal question. That is something that it's somehow chasing me for a while. What is worse, in your opinion, is lack of just cause or lack of common enemy?
It depends on the context. And that's where I showed you where we learned that there are different tribes for different environments. I don't think there's one that's worse than the other. I've learned that the four big ones that I always go after is just cause, common enemy, external measure of success, and justice mechanism. Those are the ones that have the biggest impact on the success of the organization. I frankly can't answer you. I will deal with them all. And many times it depends on the environment that I'm in. In my example that I gave of the new product development, the common enemy was unknown until we found what it was fear. Nobody thought it was there.
Okay, that's a good one. Okay, let's go to the questions from the audience. Coraci Jr., he asked, do you notice the influence or similarities between the concepts of tribal behavior and the concepts of the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu about habitus, social space, and social culture?
I must admit that I'm not familiar with the work of Pierre Bourdieu, so I will put it on my to-do list. to make
Okay.
sure that I can study it and give you an answer. So I apologize for that. Lacking my own education.
Okay, nice. Now we have David Ramirez said that this already answered during your presentation. Milton is asking if the best growing environment when tribal value is threatened and individual value is stable, how to keep the tribal value constantly at check and unsettle, causing growth to decrease.
Can you ask me again, please?
Can you see it, the Q&A, Ray?
I can.
There is a...
So let me go there. Yes.
Let me just...
So is it Milton's question that you're looking at?
Yes, from Milton.
Yes, so it says, if the best growth environment, when tribal value is threatened and individual value is stable, how to keep the tribal value constantly at check so it don't settle, causing growth to decrease. Yes. So Milton's question is, when the tribe goes from tribal value to tribal security, it feels threatened, it feels that we're under threat and the company becomes defensive.
Yes.
That's exactly where tribal leadership is incredibly important. Because the leader then takes the responsibility for redefining the just cause, or refocusing the organization on what's important to make sure that it succeeds. And one of my greatest examples is Elon Musk in Tesla. When Tesla was about 2 years ago, when everybody was shorting Tesla, they said the stock price was going to crash, they're never going to make their production targets, they're never going to do they're not going to get there. And Elon Musk took his sleeping bag and he went and slept on the factory floor next to the production lines. And that signified to the tribe his utter commitment to make sure that the organization is not going to lose. And that shifted this tribal security to tribal value. Just the action of the leader to show that he's committed to the tribe more than just standing up and making pleasantries on stage, is actually go do things to show that I'm committed.
Yes, I see that. This episode on the sense of the leadership. I think that's okay, but I don't like when people see this as a general, advice for everybody. I think that what Lennon did was necessary, but not exactly a general, advice for everyone. But it's good.
David.
David's asking something that is mostly related to Kanban. With Kanban we say you manage the work, not exactly the workers. So this is the background of the question.
My experience has been the workers will figure out how to manage the work. If I focus very heavily on making sure that I have the external measure of success, the criteria for belonging to the tribe, what is expected of us to succeed, and co-responsibility. That's an incredibly important part. In my example in Mexico, where we took out the org structure and we put in systems, the teams in each system was rewarded on the evaluation by the upstream and downstream systems. And as soon as people know that their performance measurement is not dictated by their own behavior, but by how other people see their contribution, they immediately figure out how to get the work done more productively. So there's a fundamental assumption again in that function process model that says I have to prescribe the way the work has to be done. And many times that's not the most effective way, because things change in the organization so fast that you rely on the teams to make the changes themselves to make sure they stay as effective and impactful as they can.
Yeah, what I see in your work, Ray, is that you basically move some of the things that the complexity theorists call attractors, and the way that we see all your tribal, attributes is more like, attractors for them to do the job. So that's one of the powerful ways to do it. There's a good one. I think that everybody might be asking this. You show all this data about how you manage this case study, okay? How exactly you measure something like if you have rituals, if you have a common enemy, if you have just cause, how exactly you get to the numbers? I think that this is the
Yes. So we spent many years developing a online questionnaire that's essentially a Likert scale assessment tool that has 174 questions that measures each one of the tribal attributes and the tribal security and the individual value, which we've proven over time to be fairly accurate and internally consistent to give us the result.
And you run this questionnaire with the leaders and everybody. What exactly is the scope of that?
Everybody. The entire organization goes through that. We do put work in the beginning to make sure we try and identify where we think the tribes are. And then when we do the analysis, we analyze the sub-tribes. I can give you a quick example. We did one in a big petrochemical company. The most motivated tribe, the happiest people in the company were the executive assistants. They felt so good about themselves because they were working with the bosses. They had insight to all the big secrets. You couldn't get to the boss if you didn't go past them. They had enormous sense of power. They felt enormously good about themselves because they controlled so much. And they were the least important people in the company. The group that was the least motivated were the petrochemical engineers, the people that kept the refineries going. These guys were constantly under pressure for better performance, constantly under pressure for not breaking down, constantly under pressure for not screwing up. They were badly demotivated. The people that were the most important to the success of the company were the least motivated. The people the least important were the most motivated.
Wow, yeah, that's a good insight. I think that will be something similar here in Brazil, for sure. So let me just some work here. Veronica is asking, this one is already answered. Let me see how that this is the question. Okay, this is the last one, Ray, from Veronica.
Yes, I see it. So tell me about system teams and data and how it impacts management. It's a very important question, Veronica. What I see is that management is kind of at a crossroads. As people get more data, as they become more independent professionally, the more difficult it is to manage people because they don't adhere to the subordination of functional structures. So we see much more adaptable, much more flat organizations that interact with one another. And we present a leadership training program to teach managers and leaders and executives how to manage systems and teams. It's a whole new set of skills that don't exist. Not in the MBA programs, it's just not taught at all.
Okay, Ray, thank you. Ray, again, it's a great pleasure to have you here. You see that by the level of the questions, you know that your work is well known here in Brazil. And
thank you. I can just make one last point. There's a bunch of videos on our Akzeon YouTube channel that goes into much more detail. If anybody wants to learn more about this, you can go look at the videos.
Okay, I'll send them the link so they can get to this material. Great.
Thank you, everybody. I much appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. We need to keep going here, Ray. But again, thank you.
Take care, everybody.